Amelia's eyes opened slowly, and the world returned in fragments. The gentle sway of the carriage, the smell of leather and aged wood, the steady warmth against her cheek. It took only a second for the realization to strike her like lightning from a clear sky. Her head was resting on Sebastian Sterling's shoulder. She had fallen asleep. She had allowed herself this vulnerability in front of the most watched man in the entire state, the man whose self-control was legendary, whose gaze could silence an entire ballroom. And now, here she was, leaning on him as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Embarrassment crept up her neck, burning her cheeks. She braced herself for him to pull away, for a sarcastic comment, for the discomfort that was sure to follow. But none of that happened. Sebastian simply tilted his head slightly toward her, and in a low voice that seemed to caress the silence, said she could keep resting if she wished. As if protecting her was more important than keeping up appearances. As if, in that instant, he had chosen to be a man before a name. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and let us know what city you're tuning in from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to the beginning, to the moment when two wounded souls accepted a deal they never imagined would change their lives forever. Amelia Hayes was 32 years old when the proposal arrived. She was a woman of serene beauty, almost dangerous when unguarded, with brown hair that fell in soft waves to her waist and honey-colored eyes that seemed to hold too many secrets for a single lifetime. Her fair skin contrasted with the delicate freckles that dotted her nose, a legacy from a childhood spent under the sun on the farms upstate. There was something in her posture that spoke of strength earned, not inherited. She was the kind of woman who had learned to walk alone because she had been left with no other choice. The independence she cherished so much had been won late, after years suffocated in a loveless marriage that ended with her husband's death. Widowed at 28, Amelia discovered a freedom she had never known. She learned to manage her own finances, to make her own decisions, to exist without needing anyone's approval. That tranquility was her most precious possession, and she protected it with everything she had. The house where she lived, a modest property on the outskirts of the city, reflected exactly who she had become. Windows always open to the sunlight, a flower garden she tended herself, simple but welcoming furniture. There was no ostentation, only peace. The smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the song of birds at dusk, the breeze that drifted through the porch carrying the scent of flowers. It was everything Amelia needed. It was everything Amelia wanted, or so she believed. The proposal came via a formal letter delivered by a messenger in an impeccable uniform. 3 months of a public engagement to Sebastian Sterling, calculated appearances, rehearsed smiles, enough proximity to convince society, but never beyond what was acceptable. In return, she would receive a generous sum that would guarantee her independence for many years to come. The deal was simple, pragmatic, devoid of any romance. Sebastian Sterling was a 36-year-old man, known for his striking good looks and irreproachable demeanor. Tall, with broad shoulders and strong hands that seemed sculpted to hold both reins and destinies with equal firmness. His hair was as black as a raven's wing, always impeccably combed back, and his deep blue eyes held a coldness that intimidated even the bravest. A strong jaw and thin lips completed a face that many women dreamed of touching, but none dared to get too close. There was something about Sebastian that kept the world at a safe distance. He was the kind of man who dominated any room with his mere presence, who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard, who carried the weight of his name as if it were a second skin. But behind that impenetrable facade, there was a loneliness that few perceived. The loneliness of someone who could never fail, who always had to be perfect, who had learned to hide any trace of vulnerability. The arrangement interested Sebastian for reasons he revealed to no one. Society was beginning to pressure him to marry, and a temporary engagement would buy him time. Time to resolve matters only he knew about. Time to maintain absolute control over his own narrative. When Amelia accepted the proposal, she did so out of pragmatism. She had something very important to lose, and that money would ensure she would never have to depend on anyone again. There was no room for feelings in this agreement. There was no room for illusions. Their first meeting took place on an autumn afternoon, when the leaves were beginning to turn golden, and the air carried that crispness that heralds change. Amelia wore a simple navy blue dress without excessive adornments, her hair pinned in an elegant bun that exposed her delicate neck. Her hands, trembling slightly, clutched a small velvet purse as she waited in the parlor of the Sterling mansion. When Sebastian entered, she felt her breath catch for a moment. He was even more imposing in person, his presence filling the room as if the space had been created just to contain him. He wore a perfectly tailored dark suit, and his blue eyes analyzed her with an intensity that made her feel completely exposed. "Mrs. Hayes," he greeted, his voice deep and controlled. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." "Mr. Sterling," she replied, maintaining her composure despite her racing heart, "I believe we have much to discuss." The dialogue that followed was formal, precise, devoid of any human warmth. They discussed the terms of the agreement as if they were negotiating the purchase of a property. Dates for public appearances, expected behaviors, boundaries to be respected. Amelia nodded at each point, her analytical mind registering every detail while her heart remained carefully guarded. Could she maintain this distance for 3 months? Could she fake an engagement without anything real seeping through the cracks? The weeks passed like leaves carried by the wind, and with them, something began to change silently. The public appearances that were supposed to be mere theater gained an unexpected naturalness. Sebastian discovered that Amelia had a sharp intellect and a subtle humor that surprised him. Amelia discovered that behind the magnate's coldness was a man who listened more than he spoke, who observed more than he judged. The carriage ride to the Sterling family estate upstate was planned as another calculated appearance, a formal visit to meet his relatives, to solidify the image of the engagement in society's eyes. Amelia prepared as if for a battle, arming herself with composure and professional distance, but the accumulated fatigue of the past few weeks, the hypnotic rhythm of the carriage and the comfortable silence of the road broke through her constant vigilance. She fell asleep unintentionally. She fell asleep because, without realizing it, she had let her guard down. She fell asleep because, at some point she couldn't pinpoint, she had begun to feel safe in this man's presence, and then she woke up with her head on his shoulder. What Sebastian felt in that moment, she would never fully know. But his gesture, that naturalness in allowing her to remain there, that choice to protect rather than retreat, planted something in her chest, something she couldn't name, something that deeply unsettled her. In the days that followed at the Sterling estate, that moment hung between them like a shared memory. Amelia noticed that Sebastian now watched her with a different kind of attention, less strategic, more personal. A gaze that lingered a second too long. A careful gesture as he helped her up the steps. Small approaches laden with silent intention. The third week brought the ball at the main mansion, a grand event lit by hundreds of candles that made the ballroom sparkle, as if stars had descended from the sky to dance among the guests. Amelia wore an emerald green gown that highlighted the color of her eyes, her hair down in curls that framed her face. When she entered the ballroom, she felt the gazes turn to her, appraising, curious, some filled with poorly disguised envy. And then she felt his gaze. Sebastian was across the ballroom, impeccable in his dark attire, but his blue eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her shiver. There was something different in that look, something that wasn't part of the deal. As he crossed the ballroom toward her, the world seemed to slow down. The other guests became blurs of color and sound, and all that existed was him walking toward her, each step filled with purpose. "Will you grant me this dance?" he asked, extending his hand. She accepted. She accepted because refusing was impossible. She accepted because her body responded before her mind could. The dance was different from all the others. The proximity was closer than protocol required. His hand on her waist was firm, secure, guiding her with flawless precision. Amelia could feel the warmth of his body through the layers of fabric, could smell the discreet scent of sandalwood and something else that was uniquely him. The world shrank to the space between them, and every turn, every step felt like a silent conversation. "You seem different tonight," he murmured, his lips far too close to her ear. "Different how?" she asked, her voice huskier than she would have liked. "Less armor. More you." Amelia felt her face flush. How could he see through her defenses? How could he perceive exactly what she was trying to hide? Time, that relentless master that waits for no one, continued its inexorable course. The days turned into weeks, and the wound Amelia carried in her chest began slowly to heal. She found herself looking forward to her moments with Sebastian. She didn't avoid them. She didn't downplay them. She anticipated them. And that troubled her deeply because the agreement didn't account for desire. It was on a stormy night that everything changed. The rain lashed against the windows of the library where they had both taken refuge, and the fire in the hearth cast dancing shadows on the book-lined walls. Amelia held a cup of tea that had long gone cold, her eyes lost in the flames. "Why did you accept this arrangement?" Sebastian asked, his voice breaking the silence. She hesitated. She hesitated because the true answer would expose too much of herself. But there was something about that night, about the intimacy forced by the storm, that made her lower her defenses. "Because I spent years trapped in a marriage that suffocated me," she confessed, the words coming out slowly, as if each one cost a piece of herself. "When my husband died, I discovered I could breathe for the first time. This money ensures that I will never have to depend on anyone again, that I will never lose my freedom." Sebastian watched her in silence for a long moment. Then, to Amelia's surprise, he opened up as well. "I understand more than you know," he said, his voice losing some of its usual coldness. "I've spent my entire life being what others expected. The perfect heir, the impeccable Mr. Sterling. I was never allowed to fail, never allowed to be just me." In that moment, something shifted between them, something that could not be undone. "And who are you?" Amelia asked, the boldest question she had ever asked him. "Who is Sebastian when no one is looking?" He stood up and walked to the window, his back tense. The rain streamed down the glass like tears, and the silence between them was heavy with unspoken words. "A tired man," he finally answered. "A man who dreams of something he never believed was possible for him to have. And what would that be?" He turned and his eyes met hers with an intensity that made her hold her breath. "Someone who sees me beyond the name. Someone who stays not for what I represent, but for who I am." How many times had she dreamed of a moment like this? How many nights had she spent imagining that someone would see her beyond the scars she carried? Amelia felt her eyes sting, and a lump formed in her chest. Because there, in this man the world considered cold and unapproachable, she recognized the same loneliness that had been her companion for years. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the library, something quietly bloomed. Winter gave way to spring, and as the flowers blossomed in the estate's gardens, Something also blossomed within those two bruised hearts. The mansion that once seemed cold and impersonal came to life. Laughter echoed through. The halls and the servants exchanged knowing glances as they noticed how their master had changed. Amelia noticed that Sebastian smiled more. Not the calculated smiles for society, but genuine smiles that reached his eyes and completely transformed his face. He would spend hours talking with her about books, about dreams, about fears he had never revealed to anyone. And she, in turn, discovered that she could be vulnerable without fear of being destroyed. But not everyone celebrated this transformation. Sebastian's cousin, Selina Sterling, watched everything with eyes that did not smile. At 40, Selina was a woman of faded beauty and undiminished ambition. Her blonde hair, once lustrous, had lost its shine, and the lines around her eyes revealed years of bitter expressions. She had always believed she would be the one to manage the family fortune, and Amelia's arrival threatened all her plans. A widow with no name, no fortune, Selina would mutter to anyone who would listen. It's obvious she's only interested in the money. My cousin is being manipulated. The comments began to circulate through the drawing rooms. Appraising glances followed Amelia wherever she went. Society, always watchful, always ready to demand definitions, began to question the legitimacy of the engagement. And then something unexpected happened. During a formal dinner at the mansion, with dozens of distinguished guests present, Selina made her move. She stood up with a glass of wine in her hand and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'd like to propose a toast," she announced, her voice as sweet as poison. "To our dear Amelia, who has so skillfully captured the magnate's heart in such a short time. They say widows are especially talented at recognizing opportunities." The silence that followed was deafening. Amelia felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. Her throat tightened and tears threatened to spill over. She wanted to run, to disappear, to wish she had never accepted this damned arrangement. But before she could react, Sebastian stood up. "Cousin," he said, his voice as sharp as steel, "you should be more careful with your words. Amelia is my fiancée, and any insult to her is an insult to me." "But Sebastian, I was only—" "You are dismissed from this dinner, and I suggest you reconsider your behavior if you wish to remain welcome in this house." The silence among the guests was thick with tension and curiosity. Selina turned pale, her eyes flashing with contained rage. But faced with the unshakable authority of Sebastian Sterling, she had no choice but to withdraw. When the door closed behind her, Sebastian walked over to Amelia and extended his hand. "Shall we?" he asked, his eyes conveying something words could not express. She accepted. She accepted because refusing was impossible. She accepted because in that moment she understood that he had chosen her. He had chosen her in front of everyone without hesitation. The days that followed brought a visible change in their relationship. The formality that still existed between them began to melt like snow in the sun. Amelia started calling him by his first name, and the sound of Sebastian on her lips made something stir in his chest. It was during a walk through the garden that the first kiss happened. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the scent of roses filled the air. Amelia was commenting on how beautiful the flowers had bloomed that season when she felt his hand take hers. She stopped. She stopped because her heart was pounding. She stopped because she knew what was coming next. "Amelia," he murmured, turning her gently to face him, "I need you to know something." "What?" "This stopped being an arrangement for me a long time ago." The words hung between them like petals suspended in the air. Amelia felt her eyes sting, felt the lump in her throat, felt everything she had tried to suppress overflow at once. "Sebastian, But he didn't let her finish. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted to. She didn't want to. She couldn't. Not when every fiber of her being yearned for this moment. The kiss was gentle at first, almost a question, but when she responded, when her lips moved against his, something exploded between them. The kiss deepened, filled with all the restraint of the past weeks, all the unresolved tension, all the passion they had tried to deny. His hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and hers rose to his neck, her fingers tangling in his black hair. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. Sebastian's eyes, usually so controlled, shone with an emotion Amelia had never seen before. "I've fallen in love with you," he confessed, his voice hoarse. "I didn't plan this, I didn't want this, but it happened, and now I don't know how to pretend I'm indifferent anymore." Amelia smiled. She smiled because there were no more words. She smiled because for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of the future. "Me too," she whispered. "Me too." But the happiness blooming between them did not go unnoticed by those who wished for their destruction. Selina, humiliated and furious, plotted in the shadows. She had discovered something about Amelia's past, something that could destroy everything. The confrontation came during another social event, this time a charity ball in the city. Amelia wore a golden gown that made her shine like the sun, and Sebastian couldn't take his eyes off her. They were happy, they were in love, they were vulnerable. Selina waited for the perfect moment. When the ballroom was full and all eyes could see, she approached with documents in her hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice cutting through the music, "I beg your pardon for the interruption, but there is something you all need to know about the supposed fiancé of Mr. Sterling." Amelia's blood ran cold. Her fingers tightened on Sebastian's arm, and she felt the world crumble around her. "These documents prove that Amelia Hayes is not who she claims to be," Selina continued, savoring every word. "Her previous marriage was arranged to cover up a shameful family debt. She is a fortune hunter, and she is using my cousin exactly as she used her first husband." The silence that followed was devastating. Amelia felt tears stream down her face, felt the humiliation burn every inch of her skin. It was true. It was true that her marriage had been arranged, that her family had sold her to pay off debts. But it wasn't the whole truth. She wanted to explain. She wanted to explain that she had been a victim, not an accomplice. She wanted to explain that she had spent years trapped in an abusive marriage, that her husband had treated her like property, that her freedom had been won with blood and tears. But the words wouldn't come. The words simply wouldn't come. What if Sebastian believed Selina? What if this was the last time he looked at her with love? What if everything they had built collapsed like a house of cards? But then something unexpected happened. Sebastian took a step forward, positioning himself between Amelia and the crowd. His posture was that of a man ready for war, his eyes flashing with a fury few had ever witnessed. "Selina," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "you have made a grave mistake." "A mistake? I'm protecting our family from a—" "You are trying to destroy the woman I love," he interrupted, "and that I will not allow." The entire ballroom held its breath. Sebastian never spoke of love. Sebastian never showed emotion in public. And there he was, declaring himself in front of all of society. "I know Amelia's past," he continued. "I know every detail, every scar, every pain she carries, and I choose to stand by her not in spite of it, but because of it. Because the woman she has become, despite everything she has suffered, is the most extraordinary woman I have ever known." Amelia sobbed. She sobbed because she hadn't expected it. She sobbed because, for the first time in her life, someone was choosing her completely. Without reservations, without conditions. Sebastian turned to Selina, and his expression was like ice. As for you, cousin, you are banished from this family. Your assets will be frozen and your reputation will become exactly what you tried to make of Amelia's. I hope it was worth it. Selina turned white. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. Under the stares of the very society she had tried to impress, she was escorted out of the ballroom, defeated and humiliated. When the doors closed, Sebastian turned back to Amelia. There was so much tenderness in his eyes that she felt her heart overflow. "Forgive me," she whispered. "I should have told you." "There is nothing to forgive," he replied, taking her hands. "You are not your past, Amelia. You are who you chose to become, in spite of it." That night, when they were finally alone, Amelia told him everything. She told him about the forced marriage, about the years of humiliation, about how she had learned to survive by hiding within herself. She cried. She cried as she hadn't cried in years. She cried until there were no tears left. And Sebastian was there through every sob, holding her, protecting her, loving her. "I don't want to pretend anymore," he said when she finally calmed down. "I don't want any more arrangements or deadlines. I want you, Amelia. I want to be the man present in all the days to come. I want this engagement to be real." She looked at him through her tears and smiled. She smiled because she finally understood. She didn't have to lose herself to choose this love. She didn't have to give up her identity to belong to someone. "Yes," she answered. "Yes, I do." The wedding took place 3 months later, in an intimate ceremony in the estate's gardens. Amelia wore a simple white dress, wildflowers in her hair, and the most genuine smile she had ever given. Sebastian waited at the makeshift altar under a rose-covered pergola, and when he saw her walking toward him, his eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. The vows they exchanged were written by them, simple words filled with truth. They promised to be partners, not just spouses. They promised to grow together, not to get lost in each other. They promised to choose this love every day, not just when it was easy. The years passed like pages, turning in a book whose ending was more beautiful than either of them had dared to imagine. The mansion that was once cold and silent filled with life, with laughter, with love. 2 children came to complete their family. A boy with his father's blue eyes and a girl with her mother's warm smile. Amelia kept her identity. She continued to tend her garden, continued to read voraciously, continued to be the strong, independent woman she had always been. But now she had someone by her side, someone who supported her, who admired her, who loved her exactly as she was. Sebastian kept his dignity. He continued to be respected, continued to manage his business with competence. But now there was a lightness in his step, a warmth in his eyes, a happiness that radiated from within. He had learned that being vulnerable was not weakness, and that to love completely was the greatest courage a man could have. Selina, for her part, disappeared from society. She moved to a distant city where no one knew her shameful story. Sometimes, Amelia thought of her with something akin to pity. After all, Selina would never know the happiness that came from loving genuinely, from being loved in return, from building something real with another person. One autumn afternoon, many years after that first carriage ride, Amelia and Sebastian sat together on the mansion's porch. Their children played in the garden, their laughter echoing in the crisp air. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky the same colors as their first kiss. "Do you remember?" Sebastian asked, lacing his fingers through hers. "What?" "The carriage ride, when you fell asleep on my shoulder." Amelia smiled, a blush rising to her cheeks even after all these years. "I was so embarrassed when I woke up," she confessed, "and I was terrified you would pull away," he answered. "In that moment, I realized I could no longer imagine my life without you." She tilted her head, resting it on his shoulder once again. The same gesture from so many years ago, now filled with an intimacy built day by day, choice by choice. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For letting me stay. For choosing me. For loving me when I didn't yet know I deserved to be loved." Sebastian kissed the top of her head, his arms wrapping around her, as they always did, as they always would. "Sometimes," he murmured, "it all begins when someone falls asleep without meaning to and wakes up feeling too safe to ever want to leave." And there, on that porch bathed in the sunset, two souls who had started with an arrangement ended with a love that would last forever. Not because fate had decided it, but because they chose day after day to stay together. Dear listeners, we hope this story has touched your heart. If you were moved, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what touched you the most. Every day, we bring you real stories full of emotion and humanity. Your voice is part of this universe.